The desert didn't care who you were, only whether you would bleed. It whispered in wind-blown grit and baked the bones of both saints and outlaws. The horizon stretched endless and harsh, painted in heat and silence. Scorched mesas loomed like broken teeth, and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. No law, no mercy, only the certainty that a single mistake could leave a soul scattered beneath the buzz of vultures. It was here that Alira Rowan stumbled, dust clinging to her dress, her lips cracked from thirst. Every step felt stolen from the earth, every breath a bargain. She had learned long ago that the desert listened, and it demanded payment in sweat, in blood, in silence. Her shadow wavered thinly across the sand as she pressed forward, but the silence pressed back heavier. Somewhere behind her, a memory of fire and smoke lingered. Ahead of her, nothing but the unknown. And yet, she walked, because to stop was to be claimed by the land, and Alira had not yet agreed to die. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that didn't belong, the faint crunch of movement against gravel. Alira froze, her heart clenching in her chest. She wasn't alone. From the edge of a dry arroyo, a figure emerged, tall, lean, and painted by the dust of 100 storms. His dark hair was tied back, his skin bronzed by sun and time, and his eyes, sharp as obsidian, fixed on her with a gaze that seemed both wary and unreadable. Taryn Blackthorn, a name she didn't yet know, stood watching like a shadow made flesh. For a moment, neither spoke. The desert itself seemed to hush, waiting. Alira's hands trembled near the folds of her skirt, her throat tight with the urge to run. But she didn't. She couldn't. His stance wasn't threatening, yet his presence held weight, like a blade unsheathed but not raised. Finally, his voice cut through the stillness, low and even. "You shouldn't be here." The words weren't cruel, but they carried warning. Alira swallowed hard, her lips too dry to answer quickly. Her pulse thundered, torn between gratitude that someone had found her and dread of what he might want. Alira's knees buckled, and she dropped into the sand, the strength gone from her legs. The dry heat pressed against her chest like an iron weight, and she clawed at the earth as if she could drag herself forward by sheer will. The man didn't move at first. He studied her, his expression hard to read, as though weighing whether to walk away. For one sharp moment, she thought he might. Her heart seized at the thought. Alone, she would never rise again. Then, without a word, he stepped closer. His shadow fell across her, breaking the glare of the sun. He crouched down, a leather flask sliding from his belt, and held it out. Alira hesitated, her cracked lips parting but no sound coming. Was it a trick? A test? His eyes narrowed, impatient but not unkind. "Drink," he said firmly. Her trembling fingers reached out. The water was warm, but it struck her tongue like salvation. Each swallow clawed life back into her veins, though she coughed and sputtered between gulps. When she lowered the flask, she dared glance up at him. His gaze stayed steady, guarded, but in it was the faintest glimmer, not of pity, but of choice. He hadn't left her to die. Alira wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, the taste of dust still heavy despite the water. The stranger rose smoothly, his height casting her in shadow again, and for a moment she wondered if he might vanish as suddenly as he had appeared. Instead, he extended his hand, calloused, steady, unshaken by the sun. She hesitated, every instinct telling her not to trust, but her body no longer gave her the luxury of pride. Slowly, she placed her trembling fingers into his palm, and he pulled her up with surprising strength. "Where are you headed?" His tone carried more curiosity than concern. Alira shook her head, too weary to explain. "Anywhere not here." A faint flicker of something, maybe amusement, maybe disbelief, crossed his face. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and started walking, not waiting for her reply. After a few paces, he glanced back, a wordless command in his eyes. "Follow." She did. The desert stretched around them, merciless and unchanging. But with his stride setting the pace, the silence between them began to feel less like emptiness and more like uneasy company. For the first time in days, Elira felt the tiniest thread of direction, though she had no idea whether it would lead to safety or ruin. By nightfall, the desert cooled but did not forgive. A small fire crackled between them, its glow catching the sharp angles of his face. Elira sat across from him, hugging her knees, the silence stretching longer than the flames could fill. He worked with deliberate motions, slicing dried meat with a worn knife. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. "You've got no horse. No supplies. Why were you out here alone?" Elira's throat tightened. She could have lied, but something in his voice made her pause. "I didn't have a choice." His eyes lifted, catching hers across the firelight. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw recognition there, as if he understood more than she had said. But the look vanished, shuttered like a door closing. "You won't last a day on your own." The words weren't cruel, just flat, like fact carved into stone. She bristled, wrapping her arms tighter. "And with you, I'm supposed to believe I will." His jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he tossed her a strip of meat. The gesture was sharp, almost dismissive, but her stomach ached too much for pride. She caught it clumsily and chewed in silence, the taste harsh but filling. The fire hissed in the quiet. Across from her, his gaze returned to the flames, unreadable as ever. The fire had burned low, leaving only embers glowing against the vast dark. Elira fought to keep her eyes open, exhaustion pulling at her, when the stranger's head snapped up. His hand went to the knife at his side before she even heard it, the faint crunch of movement in the brush. Her pulse leapt. Shadows shifted at the edge of the firelight, shapes moving with intent. Men, 3 of them. Their laughter was coarse, their boots grinding the sand as they drew closer. The stranger rose in a single motion, his stance changing, calm but edged with danger. He said nothing, but the weight of his presence spoke enough. One of the men sneered, eyes flicking toward Elira like a prize left unguarded. "Looks like you've found yourself company." The man jeered, his hand brushing the grip of his revolver. Elira's stomach knotted, terror pinning her in place. She wanted to run, but her body refused. The stranger shifted, stepping slightly in front of her, blocking their view. His voice was low, deliberate. "Keep walking." For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. The crackle of the dying fire seemed loud as thunder. Then the men muttered among themselves, the threat lingering in their laughter as they finally drifted back into the dark. Elira exhaled shakily, realizing she had been holding her breath. He hadn't even looked back at her, but his choice had been clear. The desert grew quiet again, the silence heavy after the men's footsteps faded into nothing. Elira sat frozen, her hands trembling against her knees. She couldn't stop replaying the scene, the way those men had looked at her, the way he had stood between them like a wall. Finally, she found her voice, low and unsteady. "You didn't have to do that." The stranger crouched by the fire, feeding a branch into the fading embers. He didn't glance at her, just said, "Didn't feel like burying anyone tonight." She almost smiled, almost, but the fear still gripped too tightly. "I thought you might leave me there, like everyone else has." That made him pause. His eyes lifted, catching hers in the dim glow. There was no pity in his expression, but something in it carried weight, something unspoken. "I don't waste my time on the hopeless," he said flatly. Then, after a beat, his tone softened just enough to betray the truth hidden beneath. "You're still here. That counts for something." Her throat tightened, a lump rising that had nothing to do with thirst. She turned her gaze to the fire, blinking hard, unwilling to let him see how much those words mattered. For the first time since her world had broken apart, Elira felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared hold on to. The possibility she wasn't entirely alone. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, washing the desert in muted gold. Elira stirred from uneasy sleep, blinking at the figure already on his feet. He moved with quiet purpose, packing his few belongings, the fire no more than a scar of ash behind him. For a moment, fear knifed through her. What if he walked away now, leaving her to the emptiness? She pushed herself upright, her voice breaking the morning stillness. "Are you leaving?" He slung the satchel across his shoulder, glanced at her, and shook his head once. "Not yet." Relief swept through her so sharply she almost laughed, though instead she pressed her lips tight. She rose, brushing dust from her skirt, and for the first time since this journey began, she stepped beside him instead of trailing behind. The land stretched endless ahead, barren, unforgiving, but no longer unbearable. They walked in silence, side by side, the weight of yesterday carried between them, but no longer crushing. Elira didn't know where the path would lead, or what storms still waited in the distance. All she knew was that when the sun rose higher and their shadows stretched long across the sand, there were two of them now, and that changed everything.